What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to week 2 of the Axial SCX10-2 Honcho budget build. If you're not familiar with this series, what we're doing is we're taking this vehicle and we're upgrading it with $50 every week. If we don't spend all the money, it goes back into the pot to carry over to next week. Last week, we threw an interior in this and we did some free mods to get the suspension feeling a little bit better. This week, what we're going to handle is tires, as well as another few little small things that we can tackle to make sure that this thing is running optimally with the stock components that are on this vehicle. The first thing we're going to tackle is the tires. Now, this truck comes with Falken Wild Peaks in a ready-to-run compound. Now, these tires out on the rocks, they're just not doing as well as I would like. And normally I would even look at taking and swapping the stock tires onto a set of bead locks first and running that way. But with the performance of these tires on the rocks here locally, I just felt that I needed to tackle the tires sooner than later. Now, tire choice is a really tricky and touchy subject to a lot of people. Depending on what you want the car to look like, what terrain you're running in, what your preferred brand is. But this week, what I've decided to install on this truck is a set of Proline BF Goodrich KO2 all-terrain style tires. Now, these are not a super aggressive tire, and they're a little bit shorter than the tires that come on this truck. These tires are advertised at 4.3 inches, and the stock tires show 4.6 inches. When you put them next to each other, the size difference is not that big though. And I like this all-terrain style for this truck. It's got a wide body. I kind of want it to look a little bit more streetable, even though it does have a truggy style bed on the rear. I've ran these tires before. They actually perform really well. They kind of have an underestimating look to them. I do not plan to be running in a lot of mud. These tires probably not going to perform the best in the mud. If that is your style, you're definitely going to want something much more aggressive. The stock tires would actually probably work pretty well in the mud in comparison. Now, I have already actually mounted 2 of the 4 tires on this truck already. And to de-bead the stock tires, I didn't need any tools, any baking, any chemicals. I was actually able to just pull them off. The glue on there, I was able to just work around and get them pulled off the wheel. Pretty simple, and it didn't require any work. I'll do one on camera here and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. If it's your first time removing one of the wheels and tires from the Honcho, simply take and grip the center cap with your fingers and spin it off, and that will reveal the 7mm nut that lies below. Remove the 7mm wheel nut and you'll be able to remove the tire completely from the vehicle. So with the tire and wheel removed from the vehicle, you can simply start to just pull the tire away from the wheel. You can see there's a little bit of rubber left in there, but not a ton. Pretty easy to clean up if you're worried about it. Now, something that is very important is tire foams. However, since we are on a budget, we are going to have to work with the stock foams for this week. But because of that, I am going to glue the tires onto the wheels with a small amount of CA glue. I'm only going to glue them at 4 points on each side of the wheel. With that, I will be able to debond the tire from that plastic wheel later so that I can either swap tire foams or when we decide to swap wheels. It should be noted that if you are just going to pull the tires off the wheels, you may damage those stock tires. So if you plan to reuse them for something, you might want to go with the baking off method that I've used in the past. So now that the tires are installed onto the Honcho, there's 3 items that I want to address to make sure that the driveline and suspension on this car are working as best they possibly can. The first one is that I want to remove the axle diff covers and make sure that those ring gears are properly lubricated. The next one is that I want to address a small bind that comes with this car out of the box, and that's the panhard link and the servo horn. Those new plastic links are a little bit different dimension than what we saw before with the metal links, I believe, and I think that that's causing this to bind up a little bit on that panhard link and servo horn during the suspension cycle. I just want to try and address that to make sure that that servo is not seeing any additional binding to try and prolong the life of that tactic. And the last item I have has to deal with the rear drive shaft. When we modified that rear suspension, we do have more suspension travel now, but I noticed about mid-stroke on those shocks, I am starting to see a little bit of bind on that rear drive shaft and this spur gear cover. So let's dive into those three items. One of the changes to this new Honcho is that the ring gear in it is now made of sintered steel rather than a machined gear that bolts onto a locker. I'm going to open up the axles and just apply a good amount of grease just to make sure that these things are properly lubricated so that we get the maximum amount of life out of these pot metal gears. I'm not actually going to pull the gear completely out. I'm going to do it while it's in there. To do that, all we need to do is remove the 4 screws on the front side of the rear axle. So the great news is that these gears actually look like they were properly greased from the factory. You just never know with a ready-to-run vehicle, and it's worth the time to take it apart. Even if you've got this exact same car, I encourage you to take off the diff cover and just double check that it has enough grease installed to make sure that you get the maximum life out of your gears. So to fix the clearance issue in the front end, I've looked at spacing the servo up, but since we are currently dealing with that factory servo horn still, I don't have much room just because of the bosses and things that we see on that servo horn. What I'm actually going to do is remove the pan hard link and then just clearance it a little bit to make sure that it clears that servo horn completely. The first thing I'm going to do is just take a look and visually find where it's actually contacting that servo horn so I know exactly where I need to clearance. Next, I'm going to remove the link from the vehicle completely. Now I'm going to come in and just make a little bit of a clearance with a razor knife. Now I understand that the looks of taking material out of a plastic link may seem crazy. However, this area of the link does not seem to be what is going to be the weak point. I'm going to test fit this and make sure that it clears everything now when I reinstall it in the truck. So now with roughly 1.5 millimeters from that link removed, I can use a piece of paper to test how much clearance I have there. If I can fit a piece of paper in between the link and the rod and still remove it during compression, I feel like I'm in pretty good shape. So now moving on to that rear drive shaft. Again, I'm going to show using a piece of paper that clearance issue that I'm having. So right now I can put a piece of paper between the drive shaft and that spur gear cover, and it can move freely. But as I compress the suspension, now I can no longer remove that paper from between there without ripping that paper in half. So let's remove that spur gear cover completely and see if that fixes our issue. So now with that spur gear completely removed, I do believe that that clearance issue is completely gone just because I can fit a piece of paper in between the drive shaft and the transmission case, completely compress the suspension, and that paper still comes out easily. There's plenty of room between all of the moving parts there. There's 2 possible ways to fix this issue. The first one is to take this spur gear cover and your Dremel and just come in and sand in that area until you have no rubbing. The other one is to take and not reinstall this spur gear cover. And that's the route that I'm gonna go. Problem solved. The only precaution that I'm going to take now that I'm not going to be running a spur gear cover is to secure these loose LED wires a little bit further, just to make sure that there's no possible way that they could get sucked into this spur and pinion setup. To secure those wires better, I'm just going to add a couple of zip ties. One just past the rear slider setup, and another one to more closely attach this bundle of wires next to the motor wires. Now there's no way that those wires are getting sucked into that spur and pinion, and we've solved our clearance issue. So this week has definitely not been the most exciting week that we'll have, but a new set of tires is always something I enjoy because it really changes the look of a truck and makes it a little bit more personal as things kind of divert from that stock look. I've got a bunch of things that I'm planning, but I really have to try and schedule out everything exactly how I want it to make sure that I'm able to fit in each of the items that I want in the schedule and make sure that they make sense. I've got some other things that I'm looking forward to doing that I haven't told anybody yet, and I'm going to be working on shortly. After posting our first week's videos, a sense of friendly competition really got reinforced inside me, and I'm loving the idea of this build between myself and Matt at Scale Builders Guild. Make sure you go check out his week 2 video as well, and I'll link that in the description. Next week, we'll be doing a small giveaway along with the video, so make sure to tune back in next Wednesday for that video. But until then, guys, Thanks for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next one.